And we're privileged as we continue on in our series, God on Trial, to welcome who has now become a friend of Discovery Church, Lee Strobel, with us. And Lee is going to tackle the question, doesn't science disprove Christianity? And he wrote an entire book entitled The Case for Creator. And so it's a privilege to have him here. And for those of you that, he was here about 3 weeks ago or so, and going to be back again tonight with a cohort and a longtime friend of mine named Mark Middleberg, and they're going to do a Q&A time. I'll talk to you a little bit about that later. But Lee's going to address this important question, doesn't science disprove Christianity? Now, when you go back in Lee's background, back all the way to the 1980s, all right, you can draw your own conclusions about how old he is, okay? Lee was an atheist. Didn't believe in God. Certainly didn't believe in Jesus. In fact, when his wife Leslie became a Christian, a follower of Jesus, Lee became so upset that he considered divorce, decided that wasn't the best option, but said a better option is to prove that the whole thing about Jesus is a hoax. And so he was a legal journalist at the time. That was his career. And so he went about a 2-year study to try and disprove the resurrection of Jesus. Figured if he could take down the resurrection of Jesus, that the whole deal of Christianity would fall to the ground. Well, after 2 years, Lee gave his life to Jesus Christ because he concluded that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead. He wrote a book called The Case for Christ. Well, over these last 30 plus years, I guess 40 years, huh, Lee? He's written now about 40 books, sold millions of copies, all in the defense of the Christian faith. And so he's here this morning to continue our series, God on Trial. So we're going to show a little bumper video, and then Lee's going to start. Please give him a warm welcome as he comes. Okay, thank you.
Why does God allow suffering?
Devastating and deadly tornadoes ripped across the south.
Devastating by the strong.
Don't all religions lead to God?
Tonight, violence erupting in Jerusalem. 150 Palestinians.
Doesn't science disprove Christianity?
Stephen Hawking in his latest book.
Is the Bible trustworthy?
The Bible plays such a massive role in our lives.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Great to be back. Great to be back at Discovery Church, and I want to begin today at the beginning. You know, the most spectacular claim of the Bible comes in the very first verse of the entire book. Genesis 1, verse 1 says this, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now, the phrase heavens and earth is a figure of speech called a merism, and what it means basically is that God created everything out of nothing. And here's the question I want to address today. Can we, in our 21st century technological and scientific age, can we still believe that there is a supernatural God who created everything out of nothing? I mean, in short, doesn't modern science disprove the existence of God? I mean, some atheists think so. For instance, Dr. Jerry Coyne of the University of Chicago said this, "Science and faith are fundamentally incompatible, and science helps religion only by disproving its claims." Now, it's interesting to note that there was a recent academic study of scientists from all around the world, and it showed that a substantial majority of scientists do not agree that science and faith are at any kind of conflict at all. But as for me, like Don mentioned, I was an atheist for much of my life. And like Dr. Coyne, I believed that science disproved the existence of a creator. But the more research I did, the more I came to the conclusion that science, when done right, points powerfully and persuasively in the direction of a creator who just happens to match the description of the God of the Bible. In fact, I've come to agree with Dr. John Lennox, a professor at Oxford University, who said, "Has science buried God? No, but it could bury atheism." So what's the evidence? I want to look this morning at 3 areas of science where there have been discoveries over just the last 50 or 60 years that make a compelling case toward the existence of a supernatural creator of the universe. 3 areas of study that there's been remarkable progress just in this last half decade or half century or so. The first area has a fancy name, don't let it scare you, is cosmology. Cosmology just means the study of the origin of the universe. Where did the universe come from? So for centuries, scientists believed that the universe was eternal. It always has existed. But thanks to persuasive philosophical arguments and a series of scientific discoveries over the last 50 years concerning the expansion of the universe, virtually every scientist on planet Earth is now convinced that the universe had a sudden beginning at some point in the past. In fact, one of the great cosmologists of our day, Alexander Vilenkin of the Institute of Cosmology at Tufts University, said this: "All the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning." And even though sometimes you'll hear about alternative models of the universe that have been proposed, Dr. Vilenkin and 2 other prominent cosmologists have developed a theorem that says that any universe that is expanding on average through its history, like our universe, must have had a beginning. And this is important. Even if our universe is only a tiny part of a much larger multiverse, the theorem still suggests that the multiverse itself must have had a beginning. Well, why is it important that the universe had a beginning? It leads to one of the strongest arguments for the existence of God. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument. It's actually named after a Muslim cosmologist back from the 1400s, I believe it was. But now modern science supports this conclusion. Here's how the argument goes. Very simple. It's been popularized by Dr. William Lane Craig, a brilliant philosopher. First, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now just think about that for a second. Can you think of anything that begins to exist that doesn't have a cause behind it? Even the most famous skeptic of history, David Hume, said, "I never asserted so absurd a proposition as that anything might arise without a cause." So whatever begins to exist has a cause. Second, we now know that the universe began to exist. So if whatever begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, the conclusion is the universe has a cause behind it. So here's the question. What kind of a cause can bring a universe into existence? Well, itself must be uncaused, because you can't have an infinite regress of causes. It must be transcendent, because it existed apart from creation. It must be immaterial or spirit, because it existed before the physical world came into being. It must be timeless or eternal, because it existed before physical time began at the beginning of the universe. It must be smart, given the precision of the creation event. Must be powerful, given the incredible energy of the creation event. Must be personal, because it had to make the decision to create. Must be caring, because he crafted so carefully a habitat where we could thrive. And the scientific principle of Occam's razor said there would be just one creator. So what have we got? Listen, uncaused, transcendent, spirit, eternal, powerful, smart, personal, caring, and unique. That is a good beginning point of a description of the God of the Bible. In fact, one of the great scientists who won the Nobel Prize for his discoveries that helped establish that the universe did have a beginning, Dr. Arno Penzias, said this: "The best data we have concerning the origin of the universe are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole." So in other words, here this great scientist is saying, if you just gave me the Bible, I could have predicted exactly what science now tells us occurred with the beginning of the universe. The Bible itself puts it this way in Psalm 102, verse 25. "In the beginning, you, God, laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hand. So I think cosmology by itself goes a long way in establishing the existence of a creator. But two challenges have been raised by skeptics. The first one is this. A skeptic will respond by saying, oh yeah, if God created the universe, well then who created God? It's usually followed by na. Who created God then? Ha, bet you never thought about that. Well, the argument is not whatever exists has a cause. The argument is whatever begins to exist has a cause. God, by definition, is eternal. He never began to exist. He has always existed. In fact, before he created the universe, physical time didn't even exist. All we had was timelessness. An atheist shouldn't have a problem with something being eternal, since they maintained until they were disproven that the universe itself was eternal. But scientists are now virtually unanimous in concluding the universe did begin to exist, therefore it must have had a cause. The second objection was raised by Stephen Hawking, the astrophysicist, in his book, The Grand Design. Listen to what he said. Consider this. He said, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Did you hear that? Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. But friends, this simply postpones creation by one stage. In other words, if gravity caused the world to pop into existence by itself from nothing, where did gravity come from? Who created that? Who put that there? You still need a creator. And so Hawking's theory fails to do away with God. In fact, on the contrary, the beginning of the universe points powerfully and persuasively toward the existence of a creator. The second area of science where we've had discoveries over the last 50 or 60 years that point toward science supporting the Christian faith is the area of physics. One of the most striking discoveries of science over the last 50 or 60 years is that the numbers that govern the operation of the universe, in other words, the quantities and constants of physics, they conspire in an unexpected way, an extraordinary way, to make the universe habitable for life. In other words, the universe is finely tuned on a razor's edge in a way that defies mere chance and which is better explained by the existence of a creator or a designer. So let me explain it this way. Let's say you go out at night, and you know how on a dark night where there's no lights coming from anywhere else, and there's no clouds in the sky, and you look up and you see all the stars in the sky. You ever do that? Like you're in the Rocky Mountains somewhere? Just imagine one night you look up at the sky, and instead of just seeing random stars, you see a series of dials. About 100 giant dials in the sky. And those dials could be set to any one of trillions and trillions of possible settings. So that, you got to calibrate them all. And yet all of these 100 dials in the sky are exactly calibrated perfectly so that life can exist. Friends, that is a picture that modern physics gives us of our universe. I'll give you some examples. One of those dials represents the force of gravity. We all know the force of gravity. You drop a pencil, it's going to hit the ground, right? Well, the force of gravity is finely tuned on a razor's edge so that life can exist. Imagine the width of the universe, 15 billion light years. 15 billion light years wide. Imagine a ruler going all the way across the universe, broken down in 1-inch increments. That represents the plausible range along which the force of gravity could have been set. So it could be set anywhere along that, 15 billion light years, and yet the force of gravity is calibrated at the exact right position so that life can exist. How precise is it? If you were to change the force of gravity 1 inch, compared to the 15 billion light year width of the universe, intelligent life would be impossible anywhere in the universe. That is finely tuned so that life can exist. And that's just one of maybe 100 examples from physics. Another example is what's called the cosmological constant. Fancy word. You don't need to really understand it. It just means the energy density of space. All you need to know about the cosmological constant is it has to be exactly right, calibrated perfectly so that life can exist. If it were a large and positive number, the universe would fling apart. If it were a large negative number, the universe would collapse on itself. So it has to be exactly perfectly calibrated. How perfectly calibrated is it? It is finely tuned to 1 part in 100 million billion. Just incomprehensible. This would be like going to the moon and throwing a dart toward planet Earth and hitting a predetermined bullseye that's 1,000th of a thousandth of an inch in diameter, the width of one atom. That's how finely tuned the cosmological constant is. So if you just add those two examples that I gave you, the dial of gravity and the dial of the cosmological constant, they are fine-tuned to a precision of 1 part in 100 million trillion. That's the equivalence of 1 atom in the entire universe. It's just absolutely mind-boggling how perfectly calibrated our universe is. The odds against the initial conditions being suitable for the formation of stars is a 1 followed by 1,000 billion zeros. It's mind-boggling. The strong nuclear force, that's what holds together the nucleus of atoms. If you were to decrease it by just 1 part in 10,000 billion, all we would have in the universe would be hydrogen. No life would be possible. It's absolutely incredible. My favorite example is the ratio of the electromagnetic force to the gravitational force, which sounds fancy, but all you need to understand about it is it has to be perfectly calibrated, and it is to 1 part in 10,000 trillion. So the astrophysicist Hugh Ross, in order to help us understand how finely tuned that is, said, imagine taking a continent the size of North America and filling it with dimes, 238,000 miles deep, all the way to the moon. Okay, got that picture? Continent the size of North America, dimes piled up to the moon. Now imagine 1 billion continents the size of North America, all of which have dimes piled up to the moon. And imagine taking 1 dime out of all of that and spray painting it red, and then mixing it up against all these dimes in 1 billion continents going up 238,000 miles, and then blindfolding one person and saying, you can go among all those dimes, you can only pick out 1 dime. What are the odds you would pick up the dime that had been spray painted red? The same odds that you can, finely tune the universe in a way that this particular dial allows life to exist. It's just incredible. The astrophysicist Rodney Holder said, the way the universe exhibits an orderly structure, which is open to science to investigate, points to a mind behind it. Dr. Vera Kistiakowsky, she was a professor of physics at MIT. She was a former president of the Association of Women in Science, said, the exquisite order displayed by our scientific understanding of the physical world calls for the divine. In other words, just looking at our universe, it demands that there has to have been a creator behind it. Now, the atheist Christopher Hitchens said that this fine-tuning argument is the strongest argument for the existence of God. So how do atheists get around it? Well, they say that what if there's an infinite number of other universes? And if we spin those 100 dials at random in an infinite number of universes, sooner or later, they're going to all come up perfectly, and that happens to be our universe. We kind of hit the cosmic lottery. That's their explanation. The problem with that is there is no physical evidence whatsoever of an infinite number of other universes. Besides, one physicist told me the existence of multiple universes would be further evidence for a creator. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, my wife and I like to make bread. So we have a bread maker in our kitchen. And he said, to get an edible loaf of bread, you need a well-designed machine with the right circuitry, the right heating element, the right timer, and so forth. You have to add the right ingredients in the right order, in the right proportions, and if you don't do it just right, you don't get a loaf of bread, you get a hockey puck. And then he looked at me, he said, Lee, a universe is far more complicated than a loaf of bread. He said, if it takes a finely tuned mechanism and the right ingredients to produce a loaf of bread, then it requires a finely tuned mechanism and process to produce an infinite number of universes, and such a finely tuned mechanism points toward a creator. The Oxford philosopher Richard Swinburne was blunt. He said, to postulate a trillion other universes rather than one God in order to explain the orderliness of our universe seems the height of irrationality. Friends, personal opinion, if you just give me the evidence of cosmology, the origin of the universe, and the fine-tuning of the universe, for me personally, that's enough to convince me that there is a supernatural creator behind it all. But I want to mention one other area, and that's the area of DNA, biological information. You may remember several years ago, science completed the mapping of the human genome, which is the chemical instructions inside every cell that contain the blueprint for life. At the time they announced that, by the way, that project was led by an evangelical Christian. But President Clinton at the time, when they announced it, said, today we are learning the language in which God created life. And that, friends, is exactly correct. You see, DNA is quite literally language. Your body has 100 trillion cells in it. 100 trillion cells. Pick one cell at random and open it up. And if you were to uncoil the DNA inside just one cell in your body, it would be 6 feet tall. And embedded in that DNA would be a 4-letter chemical alphabet spelling out the precise assembly instructions for all of the proteins out of which your body is made. In fact, DNA is the most efficient information storage system in the universe. Imagine a teaspoon of pure DNA. Picture like peanut butter. You know, you dip in a teaspoon, you get a teaspoon of peanut butter. Pretend you could dip into DNA and get a teaspoon of DNA. That 1 teaspoon of DNA would be able to store all of the information needed to build all of the proteins out of which all 1,000 million species of organisms that have ever existed, and still have room left over for all of the information in every book ever written in 1 teaspoon of DNA. So how does DNA point toward a creator? Well, did any of you see a motion picture a few years ago called Contact with Jodie Foster? Anybody see that movie? Oh, wow, quite a few. I thought it was pretty good. The movie is based on a book by an atheist scientist by the name of Carl Sagan. And here's the premise of the movie that's true. Scientists have radio telescopes that are searching the heavens 24/7. And they're looking for any kind of sign of intelligent life somewhere out there in the universe. Don't you wish they would point those radio telescopes toward Washington, D.C.? We got any intelligent design here? But that's a separate thing. So it is true that scientists are scanning the universe looking for signs of intelligence. But all they hear basically is the random static, the background noise of the universe. Now, it's reasonable to assume, since it's just background static, there's no intelligence behind it. It's just random sounds of the universe. So that's the true part of the movie. The fictional part of the movie is that one day in the movie, these radio telescopes start to receive a transmission of prime numbers. Prime numbers are numbers that are divisible only by themselves or the number 1. So all of a sudden, they start getting this string of numbers that are being transmitted to them. And they reason it's too improbable that this would be just a natural occurrence to develop numbers like this. How do you take the random sounds of the universe and organize it into numbers? They concluded that this wasn't unorganized static. It was information. It was a message with content. It was numbers. And from that, they conclude there must be an intelligence out there. That's the fictional part of the movie. But it's based on a true concept. Carl Sagan, the atheist scientist, said, the receipt of a single message from space will be enough to know there's intelligence out there. One sentence is all we need to receive on these radio telescopes to tell us there is an intelligence out there. But what is DNA? What is the DNA inside every one of the cells of your body? It's a message with content. It's information. Just as English uses a 26-letter alphabet to spell out words, DNA uses a 4-letter chemical alphabet. In fact, inside every cell in your body are as many words as there are in nearly 200 years of the Sunday New York Times. Inside every cell in your body. If you were to read your genetic code, if you were to open one cell and read the genetic code and you read it out loud at the rate of 3 letters a second, night and day, it would take you 31 years to read the information just in one cell in your body. 31 years. It's the specific, detailed, written instructions for how to build all of the proteins out of which your body is made. I mean, where did that come from? If a single message from space would be enough to convince scientists that there's an intelligence out there, what about this vast storehouse of information contained in the DNA in every person? You see, nature by itself can produce patterns. We see that all the time. If you were to go to the ocean and you're walking along the beach early in the morning and the sand is wet there and there's ripple marks on the sand, you could conclude very logically that nature produced those ripple marks, that the waves produce those ripple marks on the sand. Nature can produce patterns. But if you're walking down the beach and in the sand you see John loves Mary with a heart around it and an arrow through it, you would not say the waves made that, would you? Why? Because that's information. That is a message with content. It's not just a pattern, it's information. It's a message with content. And whenever we see information, whether it's a book, whether it's a computer code, whether it's DNA, there is always, always, always an intelligence behind it. King David put it this way in Psalm 139. He said, "For you, God, created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." And friends, I believe there is plenty of evidence from 21st century science to know that full well. In fact, one of my friends is one of the leading scientists in the world. He's one of the top 30 scientists quoted in scientific publications around the world. Dr. James Tour, he's a nanoscientist at Rice University in Houston. And he told me this. He said, "Lee, I stand in awe of God because of what he has done through his creation." He said, "Only a rookie who knows nothing about science would say that science takes away from faith." He said, "If you really study science, it will bring you closer to God." Now, does that just mean it'll bring people who are predisposed to believe, Christians to believe? Or is it powerful enough to bring the skeptics to believe? Well, one day, I was living in California at the time, and I got the New York Times. I'm sitting on my front porch, and just leisurely day, I'm looking at the front page of the New York Times, and I couldn't believe what I saw. Here on the front page of the New York Times is an article that says that one of the most prominent atheist philosophers of the 20th century, Anthony Flew, the guy who wrote the book, The Presumption of Atheism, the guy who taught atheism at major universities around the world for 50 years, the guy considered to be probably the greatest philosophical atheist of his generation, Anthony Flew, this article said, has now concluded, oops, I was wrong. There is a creator. So I'm reading this and I'm going, I'm a skeptic by nature. You're telling me that Anthony Flew is one of my heroes when I was an atheist. You're telling me he's now said, oops, I'm wrong, there is a creator? I don't believe it. I don't care if it's on the front page of the New York Times. So I said, I'm gonna check it out myself. I tracked down Anthony Flew and I sat him in a chair. And I said, now, Dr. Flew, you're the greatest atheist philosopher of the 20th century. You've lectured on this for 50 years. You've written the great books on atheism. And now you say, oops, I was wrong? Can you tell me one thing that convinced you that there is a supernatural creator? And he looked at me and said, Lee, for one thing, the integrated complexity of the biological world. The exact things I was talking about with DNA convinced this great atheist that there must be a supernatural creator. And then he co-authored a book called There Is a God. And here's what he wrote. I now believe that the universe was brought into existence by an infinite intelligence. I believe that this universe's intricate laws manifest what scientists have called the mind of God. I believe that life and reproduction originate in a divine source. Why do I believe this? Given that I have expounded and defended atheism for more than half a century? The short answer is this. This is the world picture as I see it that has emerged from modern science. And I came to the same conclusion. That the evidence of cosmology and physics and DNA and other areas like the origin of life, the origin of human consciousness, point powerfully and persuasively toward a supernatural creator. And I concluded that Romans 1, verse 20 is right. When it says, for ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. So, does science disprove Christianity? On the contrary, I think that 21st century science points powerfully and persuasively in the direction of a creator who just happens to match perfectly the description of the God of the Bible. And so what should our response be? What should our response be? Well, the lyrics of our closing song really say it well. The lyrics say, if creation sings your praises, then so will I. And so let's celebrate that creation here at our campus and at the other two campuses with the song, So Will I, a response to the breathtaking evidence that points toward the reality of a creator of the universe.